Okay, welcome everybody. Thanks for tuning in. I know some people are joining us. Let me just announce that the next two Thursdays are Hanukkah. So I think we're going to take a break because it's right around the time that we're lighting the Chanukiah, just about when it gets dark. So therefore, we will resume instead the next 2 weeks in 3 weeks. I'll try to remember to make that announcement at the end as well, but just for anybody who tunes out early. Okay, let's begin. Today is a difficult day. We've had a lot of difficult days. We're living in a difficult time, and we're obviously all of us under a certain amount of stress, and it's certainly aggravated and increased when we have a terrible incident like what happened this morning with the pigua that took place in Yerushalayim, taking the lives of three very, very special people, including a Talmid Chacham, a rabbi, the principal of the school in Beit Shemesh, another lady as well, several people injured. So at the end, we're going to say tefillah for them. And this is unfortunately part of what we are experiencing. I don't think it's really separate from what's happening in Gaza. We're talking about the same ideology, the same cruelty, the same hatred of Jews, which we'll talk about more in a couple of minutes. And indeed, Hamas did take credit for what happened in Yerushalayim. And it's very, very disturbing to me that we don't react in a more strenuous fashion, in that we would consider this a break and violation of the quote-unquote ceasefire agreement that we have with Hamas. I'm not sure that it was meant that they could continue to kill Jews anywhere within Israel, and we still go on as if nothing happened. So I think that that's something that should be considered. In general, I think I don't want to make this the topic of our discussion, but I think the whole pause or ceasefire, it's a pause that may unfortunately become a ceasefire. I think it has distracted us from the primary goal of winning this war and ending this threat to Israel and the Jewish people once and for all. And that really should and has to be the priority. And I think we've moved away from that despite the rhetoric and the promises of the people who are making the decisions. I'll come back to that, but I want to first say that learning and doing any kind of limud, tefillah, is something that should be hopefully a help and a bracha for the nation and for our armed forces in particular. So here in this famous Parsha Vayishlach, most people focus on the battle or the impending confrontation of Yakov and Esav. I'm not going to do that. Those who get the Parsha sheet, I do deal with it there, but we're going to talk about the incident in Shechem. And I think obviously for all of us, we see the connection between the massacre in Gaza and the actions of Shimon and Levi and the sons of Yakov against the people of Shechem, which I guess we could define as a massacre as well. And it's not there are many similarities. Indeed, the subject of rape is prominent in both situations. Obviously, one of the most brutal and depraved actions of the terrorists, of the Palestinians, of Hamas, would be the widespread raping of women during this attack on October 7th. And obviously in the story of Shechem, it begins with the kidnapping and the rape of Dinah. So kidnapping and raping, these are really two terrible crimes that are shared by both stories in Gaza and in Shechem. And we have also to look at the whole idea of collective punishment. The world loves to talk about this idea of this terrible crime of collective punishment that is punishing people who don't really deserve to be punished because they were not part of the actual crime or terror that occurred. So we'll say some words about that, and also this idea of collateral damage, which all these slogans really, which the world loves to bring up, especially when it's dealing with Jews. And then suddenly comes out all of these charges against us for having violated these sacrosanct principles. So we'll talk about that. And the essential question that we have to grapple with is, were Shimon and Levi justified in wiping out the entire city? It was Shechem, and you could say perhaps his father, who was in a way the leader, the king of the city, who carry out this act of kidnapping and raping Dinah. It was also, Rashi tells us that it was not a simple act of sexual relations. It was something that involved all manner of different kinds of sexual crimes that were committed against Dinah. We don't know exactly her age. We know she's quite young. So you also have that added factor of someone who is certainly not a full-grown woman being taken advantage of. And so the essential question, were Shimon and Levi justified not only acting against the perpetrators of the crime, but also against the entire city? They resort to the subterfuge, as we know, of having the people the men undergo Brit, circumcision, and then on the third day attacking them. Is that something which is justified or not? I also want to say a word about Yakov's response. The act is carried out by Shimon and Levi, but Yakov is the father. So what does he have to say about it? And also, why is it that it seems, although Shimon and Levi, Shimon is older than Levi, a year older, by tradition, Shimon is 14 and Levi is 13. Sometimes the whole idea of age it loses kind of its meaning vis-a-vis our ages of today. These are obviously more than just precocious teenagers just beginning their teenage years. But Shimon and Levi, when we look at this in a larger sense, it's usually Levi that gets blamed for what happened. Why Levi and why not Shimon? And I'll even say a word about the flag of Shimon, which reflects what happened in Shechem. But I think it's something that bears discussion. Why is it Levi that is going to have the lion's share of blame or credit for what took place? So there are several opinions about what happened in Shechem and whether Shimon and Levi were justified in what they did. The Rambam Maimonides talks about the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach and says that non-Jews, as we know, they have 7 primary commandments that they have to carry out. And most of these will carry with it the death penalty if they fail to perform what they're supposed to do, at least in certain circumstances. So the Rambam says that one of the laws of Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach, the Noachide laws, is theft, which we extrapolate to be kidnapping. So when somebody kidnaps somebody, they deserve the death penalty. And another of the Sheva Mitzvot is setting up a court system. So people have to judge others and come to some kind of just conclusion and act on it so that there is justice. Otherwise, the world just resorts to complete and total chaos and depravity. So in this case, says the Rambam, not only did Shechem commit this crime of kidnapping and rape, but the city failed to do anything about it. And therefore, everyone was culpable, not only the perpetrator, but the townspeople as well. And therefore, Shimon and Levi were justified in carrying out this widespread destruction of the city. The Ramban does not totally agree with the Rambam, as often happens, and says it's not really an issue of the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach. The Ramban says, Nachmanides, that these were thoroughly evil people, and they had a code of behavior which was completely and totally something that deserved to be destroyed, and therefore Shimon and Levi actually did a favor by wiping out Shechem. I won't even get into the whole obvious connection to Shechem of today, which is also a place of terrible evil. The Avi Avot HaTuma, we would say, the heart of the, along with Jenin, but even much longer, many more years than Jenin, being the source really of the terrorism, the Palestinian terrorism that we saw an example of today. So Shechem has kind of always had that reputation. Shechem is also one of the cities of refuge, and it seems appropriate because those cities were places where a preponderance of murderers lived then and now. So says the Ramban, this is a city that Shimon and Levi were doing everybody a favor by trying to destroy. The Gur Aryeh and others have another opinion, and this is one that I really want to kind of focus on. And they say that this was not an act of aggression against a particular person or persons. This was what happened with the kidnapping and rape of Dinah, was an act of aggression against a people, against a nation, and not something, not just a crime against a young girl. It was really an act of war, they say, that was answered on a collective, or had to be answered on a collective level. And that is why when Yakov and the sons are engaging in a kind of debate, over what has happened and trying to come to grips with what their response should be. So the sons, and here it's not just Shimon and Levi, it's really all the sons, they say to their father, Nivala asa b'Yisrael, that a terrible outrage, it's hard to translate Nivala, but it means something of total evil. An outrageous act has been performed in Israel. And the pasuk goes on to say, Lishkavet bat Yakov, that essentially the daughter of Yaakov was raped. So in the same sentence, we use Yisrael and Yakov in order to say that, yes, this was done to the daughter of Yakov, who's an individual, but it was an outrage against Israel, against the entire nation of Israel, and therefore it has to be answered on a collective level. And that is one of the reasons why Levi, Dafka, is the one who takes charge, because Levi is the one who's passionate. He has this kind of automatic, reflexive urge to defend Israel or to defend God whenever there is some kind of injustice. This is part of the character of Levi. This is the DNA of Levi, to stand up with tremendous pride and strength against anyone who threatens on a communal or global level the interests of Israel. You see this, and also this tremendous feeling of justice and need to bring justice to the world. So you see it in the most famous Levi, aside from Levi himself, you see through Moshe Rabbeinu. And he is someone who always stands up against injustice. That's really how he gets a start. He kills the Egyptian. Now, you might ask, this is also a kind of extra legal act that Moshe performs, but he understands that this is just. This is an act that needs to be done. He's not really stopping to bring the Egyptian to trial, but he, however you want to coach it, whether he has prophetic vision or whether he takes the law into his own hands, he says, this has got to stop. So he kills the Egyptian. You see this when Levi, the tribe of Levi as a whole, stands up, and after the act, the sin of the golden calf, essentially punishes and goes in a kind of war against those people who worshipped the Egel Hazav. And they're standing up for God, and it's an affront to God that when you have an idolatrous act, you're really, in a sense, taking another God. And so Levi is jealous and zealous for God. And then you see it also with another famous Levi. You may not know he was a Levi, but that is Shmuel Hanavi. And he acts in this famous story when Shaul fails to kill Agag, the king of Amalek, which is why his kingdom is taken away from him. Shmuel steps forward, takes out, he's a Navi, he's a holy man, but he has a sword, takes a sword, and he kills Agag. Some say he cuts him right in half, and says he is obviously representing an ideology that is completely at odds with our own. And therefore, he acts quickly, passionately to kill Agag. And so this is what some of the commentators are saying, that we're really looking not necessarily at an individual act against another individual, but we're looking at one ideology against another. Now, Yakov, I'll come back to that in a moment. Yakov, he does not disagree with what was done. His problem is how it was done. He doesn't criticize them for having rescued Dinah and killed the townspeople, but what he didn't like is the fact that they resorted to this device of fooling the people, getting them to weaken themselves by undergoing circumcision so they would be easier to destroy. Because you're talking about two, or maybe at most, if the other brothers join in, less than a dozen people fighting against a town. We don't know how big it was exactly. But Yakov, he always has had, for all of his life, this kind of phobia about who he is. In other words, is he someone, as his name implies, Yakov, a heel, or as his new name implies, which he just has received, this name Yisrael, which contains within it the word Yashar, is he a Yashar person? He's always involved in these shady deals. He takes the birthright by disguising himself as Esav, and then his wives fool him and switch brides while they were in collusion with Lavan, and then this occurs. And he will be fooled also, as we know later on, by his sons in the story of Yosef's abduction, kidnapping, and sold into slavery. So he's surrounded by this, and he wants to once and for all establish what kind of a person he is. So he doesn't like the fact that Shimon and Levi are kind of perpetuating this image of Yaakov as someone who will do anything to get what he feels he deserves, whether it's legal or extra legal, whether it's upfront or behind your back. This is something which plagues Yaakov. And that's why when he confronts the sons after what happens, he doesn't so much criticize what they did, but listen to the words. He says to them, Achartem oti lahavisheni biyoshev haaretz. You have, this is a hard word to translate, achartem, but basically you have caused me great trouble and embarrassed me in front of those who dwell here. Baknani ubaprizi, vani mete mispar. I'm not such a big tribe. vikuni, they're going to come against me, and they're going to want to destroy me. So he's saying maybe what you did was right, but the way you did it is only going to incur wrath. But the brothers have the last word. And here they answer Yakov, and this really ends the discussion with these four powerful words. Hakazona ya'aseh achotenu. Are you going to treat our daughter and here our sister as a prostitute and reduce her to that level? So this is an act they perform for the, not just to save Dinah, but this is for the good and for the pride of Am Yisrael. I would compare it, and I've used this comparison before, if a group of people would have kidnapped the late Queen Elizabeth, and they would have raped Elizabeth numerous times. There's no question that England would regard that as an act of war, and England would go after that city-state, whatever it was, because they committed what they would consider nivala, not be Israel, but to be UK. And they certainly would not have regarded it only as a personal, individual crime, but it obviously would have been something that was really directed against the entire nation. So I think that it's clear when we look at this incident and we compare it to what's happening in Gaza, that we would all agree Gaza is not just a place. Gaza is an ideology. It's a barbaric doctrine that it's composed of many, many different elements, but certainly one of them is the hatred of the Jewish people, the rejection of the Jewish people as a legitimate religion, and this insatiable drive to destroy Israel. It's not about individuals. Every act of terror that's carried out, which they fully agree, it's not something person to person meant specifically for that individual. It's an act that's taken on a one-by-one basis to try to destroy us as a nation, to say that none of you deserve to live, that we can't exist on the same planet. Our ideology and your ideology, just as existed with Nazism. And this was, we know that that Hitler, one of his reasons, if you will call it that, for wanting to eliminate and exterminate the Jewish people was that we represented a code of moral behavior that completely went against the system of law and the system, the type of civilization he wanted to create. And therefore, we had to be destroyed in his eyes. And this is the same syndrome and the same mentality that we face when we confront an ideology like Gaza. And that's why I think that it's certainly appropriate that we're not just going after the particular individuals that invaded Israel on October 7th, or even the leaders. We're talking about a whole society that, despite what the nations of the world may foolishly, incorrectly conclude, we're talking about a people that are united in the same terrible, destructive, insidious ideology. Now, that's not to say that every Muslim thinks that way. We have seen examples, and I quote Susie when we went to Dubai, and one of the things she took from that was saying that I learned that not every Muslim or not every Arab wants to kill me. And indeed, I mentioned this, that the rabbi who, one of the main rabbis in the Emirates, made the statement, at least then, when he said, this is one place on earth, there may not be too many like it, where you can walk down the street carrying an Israeli flag, wearing an I Love Israel t-shirt, and nobody will bother you, for a number of reasons. But certainly one of them is that these people seemingly have made peace with us, and they have an ideology that does not demand that anyone who doesn't agree with them has to be wiped out. And that is really what we're facing when we're dealing with the terrorists of Gaza and all of their supporters. I haven't seen one instance of any legitimate representative of the Palestinians standing up and saying that we condemn completely what has been done in Gaza, and people who act in such a manner deserve to be treated in a ruthless and collective manner. That would have made a big difference. We're seeing the opposite. And it is spreading where people are marching all over the world, not only on behalf of Palestinians, but on behalf of the Gazans, on behalf of Hamas, and telling people publicly, we don't believe that they actually did anything wrong. And if they did, then Israel deserved it, etc. This is a mindset that we have to fight as comprehensively as we possibly can. And that's what Shimon and Levi were doing. They were saying that this isn't just about few specific individuals. This is about an evil ideology and an evil collective that we have to act against for the good of everybody, not just for our own good. And the world doesn't yet understand this. Smart people, those who see the big picture, would understand it. But what we're doing is obviously first and foremost on our behalf, but ultimately it is really for the good of the world to prevent this kind of radical jihad occurring everywhere and wiping out what we would consider moral, decent behavior. It's not easy for us to do. We are B'nai Rachamim, and that is, I think, part of our problem. They try to take advantage of that. They know that we're merciful. They know that we care about every individual, and therefore they're focusing on the kidnapped hostages. In my humble opinion, it's a mistake that we're making, because we can't fall into their trap. I was telling people that I saw an interview with a elderly mafia boss, and he was describing how in the mafia world, you always have to look over your shoulder. Somebody's always out to get you. And the interviewers said, you're from such a tough world. How did you survive so long? And he answered, you have to be tougher than even the toughest person out there. And that's not easy for us to do. We succumb to this great nature of ours that tends to be focused on kindness and the individual. And we have to understand that this is who we're dealing with, and we have to be tougher than they are, and we have to be more resolute and determined than they are in order to defeat them. The pasuk says, Ki tetzei milchama, when you shall go out to battle. So the commenters say, why does it say Ki tetzei, when you go out? And the answer, because our soldiers are wonderful, great kids. They're beautiful children with big hearts and a lot of love. And they have to go out of their inclination to be nice or to be kind. When you're fighting a war, you have to fight the war, and you have to be completely focused on that. And therefore, as countries have done, and we see this in America, and everybody knows and refers to it, that when we were fighting this brutal enemy of the Nazis and the Japanese, who could be just as insidious and brutal as the Nazis, as the Germans, we went all out, and a lot of innocent people were killed. But we were not responsible for that. They started the war. They're the ones who are perpetuating the evil and perpetrating the evil, and they have to be destroyed, whether it was with the atomic weapon, whether it was in Dresden, wherever it was. We had to do what we had to do, and we had to be tough about it. And that was the only way that we were able to crush this ideology that really wanted to take over the world in the same way that radical fundamentalist Islam wants to do now. So Shimon and Levi, at the end of the day, yes, Yakov criticizes them in his final blessing, Shimon v'Levi achim klei Hamas mecherotehem. He doesn't give a very positive bracha to them. He says they will be dispersed throughout the land of Israel. They will not receive any specific portion of land. And it seems obviously to be, very critical. But at the end of the day, Hashem overrules Yaakov, and he says, okay, you're not giving them a specific portion of land. That's true, but true, they don't have a specific portion with their brothers. Hashem hu nachalato, says God. He says, God, I am their portion. And the fact that they are split up among all the tribes, 48 cities of the Levi'im, is because they have something to teach every single corner of Israel. That same passion, that same innate understanding of standing up for what's right, standing up in defense of God and the Jewish people, that's something everybody needs to learn. And therefore, Levi is spread throughout the entire country. And I mentioned before that even Shimon, when he marches, on his flag is a portrayal of the city of Shechem. So in a sense, there is some justification even there that in pride that we did what we had to do. And it's not easy for us, but the stakes are very high and the alternative is not acceptable. We're not going to go down. We're not going to bow before this kind of evil ideology. We're going to do whatever it takes. And ultimately, Bezrat Hashem, with Hashem helping us, we're going to win this battle, and hopefully we'll overcome sometimes the need to be too kind and too merciful in order to help the world by erasing and eliminating this terrible enemy. I'm going to say a tefillah for the wounded and for the shvuyim. Mishaber Chavotenu Abraham Yitzchak v'Yakov Moshe Aaron David Shlomo Hu Yivarech V'Rapeh Et Kol Haptzuim Me'Apiguim Shel Hayom V'Kol Yom Me'Amilchama HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yimalei Rachmim Alehem Lachlimam Lachprotam Lachazikam Lachyotam V'Yishlach Lehem Mehira Refuah Shlema Min HaShamayim L'Kol Avereihem L'Kol Gidehem B'Tok Shar Chol Yisrael Refuat Nefesh Refuat Haguf Hashda Bagal Uzman Kariv and Omar Amen. Mishaberach Avotenu Abraham Yitzchak Yaakov Yosef Moshe Aaron David Shlomo Yibarach V'Yishmor V'Yinsor Et Achenu Beit Yisrael HaShvuyim Ba'avur Shanu Mitpalim Ba'avuram HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yimali Rachamim Alehem Yishmereim Mikol Tzara B'Tzukah Mikol Negel Machala Yishlach Bracha V'Tzlachal V'Chol Masei Dehem Yotzei Michoshech B'Tzalmavet V'Shiveim Meheira L'Chek Mishpachotehem V'Nomar Amen. As Hanukkah approaches, and again, we will not meet for the next 2 weeks because of Hanukkah, but certainly we hope that just as we were Zoche with the miracles of Hanukkah and the ability to overcome our enemies, and even though we were outnumbered and it seems like all the odds were against us, Hashem was with us. We were able to be Ma'atim Biad Harabim, Rabim Biad HaMeitim. We reversed all the normal expectations, and we faced greater armies, and we were victorious, and we were able to relight and rekindle the menorah, the Chanukiah, which is our symbol of the state of Israel today, that we represent light against the forces of darkness, and a little bit of light ultimately can dispel a lot of dark. And that's what we're trying to do, and hopefully we shall succeed, and we will have better days than we had today. So I'll just look at the chat for a moment. Yes, about the Red Cross. We know that they're part of this whole ideology and this interplay, cooperation between evil people. And we can't be weak. We have to, I think, support our soldiers, and we have to prop up our government and give them the courage to act courageously and to be leaders, not to follow the masses necessarily, but to do what they know is right. And sometimes it's a difficult place to be and decisions to make, but that's why they are in that position, at least for now, and they should live up to that title of leadership. So I wish everybody a Shabbat Shalom, a Chanukah Sameach, Yisarot Tovot, Yeshuot V'Nechamot, and victory, Nitzachon, for our Chaylim HaKadoshim, and to everyone. We should go from this moment a bit of darkness to moments of light, and all of us reach a state of bracha, ahava beinenu, and shalom. So thank you all for tuning in. We'll see you again in 3 weeks. Shabbat shalom. Thank you again to our host, Yossi, and we are, as always, on YouTube, so anybody misses a shiur, you can always tune in, and you can find it on YouTube. The link is always listed in the Parsha sheet as well. Shabbat shalom.